Welcome, survivors of this amazing day of cybersecurity. So, before you're all going to run off to have some coffee, please welcome on stage for releasing your inner TIBER in regulated adversary simulations, Mr. Marko Buuri.
Okay, good afternoon. Good to be here at BsidesTLL. Such a great event organization and participation from the audience. So kudos to the organizational team and you coming to take part of this event. Now this talk is about cyber threat intelligence and red teaming in context of regulated cyber exercises, which are a thing that are now happening in the financial sector in Europe. So before we get started, can we have a show of hands who is already working in cyber threat intelligence or aspires to work in this field? Okay, yeah, just few. What about red teaming or penetration testing, working already or aspiring to work in this field? Okay, not so many. So looks like the audience is mostly blue teamers or recovering testers then. But I hope that you can take a lot from this talk too. So I've worked in this field quite a while now, and currently I'm working at the central bank in Finland. I've been involved in implementing the TIBER framework, TIBER FI, since 2020. And prior to this, I was 9 years in consulting, delivering red team projects, amongst other things. So I'll try to source from these experiences for the talk today some of the things that I think that are interesting about the TIBER framework, so that to give us a highlight and pointers for you, and maybe this inspires you to learn more about the framework and how to develop your professional skills in red teaming. And that brings me to the motivation for this talk. So there's two reasons for this. One is that now that in Europe we have this regulated framework for red teaming, that's creating a lot of demand for highly skilled cyber threat analysis work, but also red teaming deliverables. So if you are a professional who aspires to work in these fields and you want to be on the top of your game in cyber threats or red team testing, this is something that you should be interested about, and there's going to be professional opportunities around this area. And the second motivation is that I think the TIBER framework is pretty good, the guidance. So even if you deliver red team projects using other frameworks and methods, I think you should be looking at this, and maybe it's a source of inspiration about how to improve your deliveries using the other methods. Regardless if your clients were in other critical sectors like energy or telecommunications, or completely like different businesses like ICT platforms providers or whatnot. A bit of disclaimer here. So this is not a full training on TIBER. To make good use of our time together this afternoon, I've necessarily cut off a lot of details from here. So if you are going to be delivering any of these regulated tests, you definitely should be checking out the official requirements from the authorities and the guidelines. Now, this talk is being videoed, so if you feel like I'm going through some of the details too quickly, you'll have an opportunity to circle back and check out the details later. Now, we know that all businesses or any business can become a target or a victim of cybercrime nowadays, and it can be motivated by financial gains by the threat actors. So financial sector entities meaning banks, insurance companies, payment services providers, they are no different as targets from this point of view. But why are authorities nowadays so interested, and lawmakers about financial sector in particular, that they are making these new regulations and guidances for red teaming? Well, the thing is that it can be difficult to source exact details about how common cybercrime is in a specific sector. But if we look at, for example, this ENISA threat landscape report that was released early this year, you can see some statistics that they had sourced from 23 and early parts of 24. You should check out the report in detail. There's good information there. But for the interest of this talk, I want you to focus on the prominent threat categories. Now, there's not a lot of surprises here, but if we look at some of them, they are not so interesting about from TIBER and authority point of view, like DDoS or individual customers of banks getting scammed to give away their banking credentials or fake invoices and those sorts of things. We as authorities are interested about this field from the point of view that we want to ensure that the critical ICT systems and services that support the critical business functions in these entities are resilient against cybercrime and cyber attacks. The reason being that the financial system, it's an interconnected system. So if one large entity becomes a victim of an incident, it can have ripple effects across the financial system. So the whole financial stability really relies on that the individual components, meaning the companies and entities, are well protected on their own. I wanted to bring a topical example, what kind of threat actors we are concerned about particularly. So I found this recent case, UNC 2891, and an ATM attack that they had conducted a bit earlier. So this threat actor group, UNC 2891, has been documented by Mandiant already a couple of years ago. And in their reporting at that time, they described the threat actor as very sophisticated, fluent in OPSEC, being able to stay hidden, fluent in Linux and Unix operations, making use of private and public malware and backdoors. But the recent case, as documented by Group IB, a different company, describes an attack against an ATM backend system. And what happened according to that report was that the threat actor was able to gain initial access on the ATM backend system by placing a remote access device that operated over 4G. And then once they had access to that local area network, they were able to move laterally, find servers to infect, and created an additional command and control channel via an internet-connected server. And based on the analysis of the tools that the threat actor had left behind when it was detected and eradicated from the system, it's believed that their end goal was to affect the backend system so that later they would have been able to use fraudulent cards to withdraw cash from ATM machines. And the ATMs would have recognized and allowed those transactions. So if we look at the steps in that attack path through the lens of unified kill chain in through out phases, it looks something like this. So there was the initial access using the device, a lot of backdoors and kernel rootkit tooling used, C2 channels using DNS and so forth. So I want you to think about these level of threat actors. These are the ones that we are concerned about in TIBER tests. So these are the kind of attack scenarios as threat intelligence analysts we need to be able to imagine, describe and justify, and as red team testers we need to be able to simulate and execute these kind of tests without the defending teams, the blue teams in the target organization knowing that this is happening. So this is the level we are going for. So how did we come here? A brief history about the evolution of red teaming. If you've been around for a while, you know that the cybersecurity red teaming started to gain maturity in the early 2010s. And why that happened at that time was that some large global enterprises were getting hacked by very advanced criminal groups that had lots of motivation, a lot of capabilities and time to breach these entities. And the companies made the observation at the time that maybe we are doing cybersecurity wrong, or at least we are verifying our controls wrong previously by doing isolated pen tests or relying too much on infrastructure controls. We should probably simulate these kind of adversaries on our own. As you know, the financial sector is amongst the first to adopt all new ideas, especially in the area of security, and that's why already in 2018 a group of central banks in Europe came together and they released this TIBER EU framework. TIBER, as you can see, comes from threat intelligence-based ethical red teaming. And it wasn't a mandatory framework at the time. It was a playbook that described the best practices, how entities in financial sector could conduct these kind of adversarial simulations or red team tests. So fast forward to this year. So what happened in January is that a new piece of European law came in effect called DORA, Digital Operations Resilience Act. And now it introduced a new term called TLPT, Threat-Led Penetration Tests, which is describing the same thing, only now it's mandatory for some entities in Europe, the largest, the most influential financial entities. So in each member state, going forward, there's going to be an authority who assigns this TLPT responsibility to banks, insurance companies, or other service providers in this field, that you as an entity are required to do the TLPT testing every 3 years or so going forward. Now, as the DORA came in effect, at the same time the central banks released a new version of the TIBER EU, so it's now a guideline and playbook how to run those TLPT tests. So how to be compliant with the DORA TLPT requirements and apply best practices in cybersecurity red teaming in financial sector context. So that's the background why we are here now. So let's have a look at who are the stakeholders in this TIBER ecosystem and how do the projects then look like. So there's in each member state there's the authority. They've let the entities know that you are going to be requiring to do this testing. But the thing is that the entity can't decide when they are going to be doing the testing. The authority will later go to each individual bank or insurance company and say that, by the way, your project started now, today. So then the entity gets organized. They will launch and organize this project according to the TIBER playbook, and the project will take about 18 months on calendar. So it's quite a large undertaking. It's not a small pen test project. One of the first things that they will do is they will look at the professional services market and try to source the best possible threat intelligence provider and the red team testing provider for their project. Now, the authorities are not giving any recommendations about this. It's for the entity to look at the available market and source the providers from there. It can be one company delivering both of these services, or it can be two companies who have joined forces and offer for a single project. Then another group of stakeholders are the blue teams. So as you know, in red teaming, it's understandably the goal that we are trying to execute and plan and execute all the testing so that it remains hidden from the IT security teams, everybody who is involved in running the security defenses on day-to-day operations. So they are not in the know until late in the project when it's time to go through the reporting from the red team. The authority appoints the test manager who will liaise with the project, and the entity will set up a control team, which is the team who is running the project at the entity. So if you've ever participated in test projects or crisis management exercises where there was a team called a white team, well, this is the same, only now in TIBER it's called a control team, to put emphasis on the fact that these are the people who are going to be accountable and controlling every aspect of this project's successful execution. The TIBER projects have only three main phases, and the testing phase is split into two parts. So there's the threat intelligence and red teaming. And we'll be mostly discussing these two going forward, so I'll just quickly recap what the other two parts are about. So the preparation phase is about getting the project started and organized. So you appoint the control team and document the scope for the threat intelligence to start. You source the service providers from the market and start the risk management process. And then in the closer phase, we will include the blue team in the mix. So they are brought in, they are told that, okay, there was this red team, and here are the red teamers. You should probably look at their reporting and have a bit of workshopping to get the maximum learnings from these projects and highlight the areas that we could be remedying or improving as controls going forward. So that's the closer phase. Now, let's dive a bit deeper in the threat intelligence part then. So what happens there? As I said, as a starting point, they have a list of ICT systems and services from the control team. But this is not an IT asset inventory or anything like that. This is the list of those applications that are critical in supporting the critical business functions. So, like in a bank, it's deposit taking and giving out loans and operating payments, these kind of like core processes. So the control team will need to identify and list those critical applications and systems in connection of these critical functions. So the threat intelligence analysts will then have a look at the list and amend it enrich it with their own sources and thinking. So they will have a look at, what are the technologies involved, what are the providers involved, is there an internet footprint to these services or systems, what's their vulnerability history, but also analyze the business. So why is this application there, who is using it, how they are using it, where is it at, what are the contents, and how this could be relevant for the criminals to target. So this is one set of information. And then the other set of information that the threat analyst will work with is the threat landscape information. So they will look at all the known threat actors operating in a financial sector space, and that could be possibly targeting this kind of entity that we are now running the project for. And then it becomes a task of trying to find the best match between these two. So they are trying to combine these data sets to create the best plausible scenario ideas for these test project. So first, the list is long. They are just ideas for now. And the threat intelligence team will work with the control team to find the justification, which ones are the best to select to go forward for refinement and documentation, and then take to the red team testing. So the list can be long at first, but at the end of the threat intelligence phase, you only have typically from 3 to 5 scenarios that are moved forward to the actual red team testing phase. So the scenarios, obviously they have a verbose explanation about what's actually happening in this scenario, and they also include the TTP. So these are the steps that we imagine that the threat actor would be taking. With all of our knowledge about this threat actor, its past activities, its motivation, its capabilities, the tooling they have used before. So all this information is brought in. And this is basically the deliverable from the threat intelligence phase. 3 to 5 scenarios, very thoroughly explained and justified with all the facts included. Now, as these projects are always time-boxed exercises, so it means that we need to bend the realms of reality a bit to assist these service providers to do the best work possible. And in threat intelligence phase, that means, for example, that they have typically free access to the information within the entity. So they get to interview the control team or other experts. They can request documentation. So this is not a matter of running some public scanning and on open source intelligence. They will actually get to look at how this company operates, how its ICT is sourced, and so what kind of technologies the ICT is built on. Now, here are some common elements that are included that are, very topical nowadays. Just an example. So the all sorts of supply chain issues are topical, of course, nowadays. So whether that's professional services, professional services like consultants that you're bringing in your organization, they could be a vector for initial access. Maybe their equipment is compromised, or maybe they are working with bad intentions. But also the software as a supply chain issue. So every company is bringing in open source software. Maybe they are sourcing the software components from wrong locations, and some of them are poisoned when you bring them in. The VPN vendors have had a bad time over the past few years with all the vulnerabilities that have been going on, so definitely makes an interesting and topical initial access vector for the TIBER tests. And then the physical break-in, always relevant, whether that's to bring a remote access device like in the ATM case, or whether it's to plant a keylogger or something similar. And then if we look at common end goals, well, in financial sector entities, there's always parts of the business and ICT operations that deal with payment materials and payment transactions, payment messaging. So obviously that's a good way from an attacker's point of view to monetize their attack. So those are common targets. Double extortion, so exfiltrating the data, threatening to release it, but also encrypting it on site and extorting with ransomware for its release. And as you know, in the financial sector, a lot of them are moving in the cloud, but have another foot still on-premises. So those on-premises environments, legacy environments, typically make a nice target for red teaming and easier than navigate there than in cloud native solutions. Okay, so now we move to red teaming. We have a short list of those scenarios. They are well described. So what is there for the red team to do but to execute all the steps, right? Well, the reality, of course, is a bit more complex than that. So one of the reasons, so we might change the attack path, how they were described in the scenarios, to how they are actually executed. And one of the reasons why we might be wanting to do that is that initial access activities are expected to be very noisy. So as you know, a lot of enterprises are now putting effort at the edge protection with the EDRs and phishing training to the phishing simulations to the employees and these kind of things. So if we think that the initial access can be very noisy and we don't want to needlessly alert the blue team right when we are starting the red team test. So we might take the attack path apart and simulate the latter parts first, and once we are done with this, we will late in the project circle back and simulate that we would have been able to do the initial access parts too. We're just doing it in this fashion for a reason. Now, it often happens that the more than one leg up, so leg up is a help from the control team for the red team to make progress. More than one leg up is needed from the control team. And this could be a situation, for example, that somewhere during the lateral movement, the red teamers are stuck in a certain network segment and they know that the target, the objective is going to be in another segment, but they can't find a way to move between these these networks, it's so well isolated. So the control team might come in and provide some kind of leg up so that they can jump past this point and then continue with the other steps in the attack path. So this is not a test in the skill of the red teamers. So that's why it makes sense to give them help so that they can test as many parts of these attack paths as possible and not get stuck in one point on the attack path needlessly. Then another complication that might arise is that when the red team testers are executing the attack path, they might recognize that there's actually a better way forward. Our scenario description says that we should be doing this thing, but in our professional opinion, now that we are looking at the environment, there's actually a better venue in our view. So how about we go that way instead? So the testers are expected to flag these points for the control team and have a discussion whether it makes sense to take this alternate way instead. And sometimes it happens that, it turns out that it's actually a better idea to do what the red team suggested, regardless of how the scenario was described. So what happens to those other ideas that were never then executed? They were tabled at the time. Well, the testers are, according to the framework, they are required to make documentation of these so that during the closure phase, when the red teamers are workshopping with the blue team, these are revisited. So there's going to be a purple team testing, or there's going to be tabletop workshopping around that, hey, if we had taken the other option here, what might have happened then? Would that been a more impactful or better way to reach the goals or not? What do you think? Is there a learning point here for us? And then the last example here is a situation where one of the scenario gets burned. So the B scenario here gets caught by the blue team, and they remove all the access and it can't be continued. But then there was another scenario, A, that was more successfully executed by the testers, that somewhere in the middle turned out to be similar to the scenario B. So let's say that the initial access vectors for the scenarios, they were not the same, and the flags and the targets at the end, they were not the same either, but somewhere in the middle they had a similar, access in a network or similar credentials or similar lateral movement. So it becomes a consideration for the red team and a control team. Now that we've successfully completed the scenario A, why don't we just reuse the access that we have there and complete with the remaining steps of the scenario B? Again, we have to remember here that this is not a test on the skills of the red teamers, and the best value for learnings comes from when we are able to do as many tests as possible. So that's why this kind of deviation is often allowed when it doesn't risk the scenario A also getting caught. So sometimes the project becomes a learning point for the red team testers also. And one of the common points I already mentioned, that the red team testers think that this is a test on them, so they might feel pride in asking for leg ups or proposing for leg ups to the control team. So this is false thinking. We are in a time box project. The red team phase typically takes from 12 weeks to 15 weeks on calendar. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend lots of, several weeks getting with the red team stuck in a certain point in the attack path. If they are finding too much difficulties, just propose and get a leg up, and we'll get more learnings from the project that way. Another one is that that there might be overconfidence from the red team about their tooling. Let's say that they've previously worked in other types of red team assignments, and now they come to a financial sector entity for the first time, that they are not really expecting that the typical baseline in security controls is a bit higher than in other types of businesses, in the financial sector. So they might be overconfident that our tooling has always worked. We're going to be deploying this, and boom, they get caught right out the gate. So this has happened, and this is, of course, a bit of an embarrassing learning point tool, which is why I want to kind of like send out this message and warn everyone that this can actually happen. And the last point here is about communication. So the control team is accountable for managing all the risks during the project. And some of these tests are going to be executed against targets and systems that have never been pen tested or red teamed in production ever before. And they are dealing with payment transactions, so if anything goes wrong, if there's any hiccup, there can be like serious monetary consequences. So it's a very delicate matter, and the red teamers are expected to be serious people about, considering that there is this risk, and you need to be careful how you tread about this, but serious about how they communicate about their activities, where they're at, what are they planning to do next, and what are the possible risks about the next steps. And this communication between the control team and the red team happens daily during some phases of the red team testing, especially when they reach very close to the critical assets in the environment. And not all testers are good in communication, so this is a thing a lesson to learn, or to apply in your projects also, how to improve and make sure that the communication will work. Now, I mentioned the leg ups previously, and again, we use that to maximize the progress during the testing phase, and by maximizing the progress, we also maximize the learnings that we get from each of the projects. There's basically two categories of leg ups. So the one category is information and the other is access. So the information is any guidance that the control team can give to the red team by validating if they are on the correct path, what are the IP addresses or system names or database names or whatnot they should be looking for, or giving information about the network architecture, or anything really that might help the red team testers to focus on the right things and not spending too much time in the dark. The access leg ups are then concrete assistance that the red team testers might receive in form of getting accounts or new privileges, or physical access, or maybe the control team will even help to plant test malware in the system, so they will install it on behalf of the red team because the red team wasn't able to get the initial access otherwise. And in some cases, the control team might provide bypass mechanisms. For example, help them bypass a firewall, or let's say that the control team really needs to get a foothold on a system that has an EDR, but they are not able to get past that EDR, or it's deemed very risky. So it might be possible that the control team will actually disable the EDR temporarily on that system to allow this red teaming activity, and not have the red team testers spend weeks or months of time in creating an exploit for that EDR tool. So these are always proposed by the testers, and then the control team has to approve them. It's getting tougher and tougher for the control teams to provide these leg ups, and the reason is that the IT change control and change management processes tend to be very strict nowadays. So imagine that some control team member, like the CISO, walks to an IT admin and tells them that, by the way, you need to punch holes to a firewall, and I can't tell you why, because it's a red team, right? So obviously that's not going to happen. So how are the control teams going to work around this? It's a topic that, we have blue teamers here in the audience. This is maybe one learning point for you to take home also, that at the same time it's good that you have strict processes, but you need to kind of like build these mechanisms in your processes so that if executive management knows that now there's this red team exercise going on, they would have some kind of lever that they could activate and then implement these leg up changes covertly in your environment. And the other hindrances are the IAM processes. So if the leg up would involve the control team to create fake accounts in your environment or give privileges to users that they shouldn't have, that can be increasingly difficult also because these IAM changes are so well monitored, and there can be steps of approvals that are normally required, and all this automation is monitoring these changes. So similarly as the other one, something to consider how you're going to be enabling these red team tests going forward in your organization. Okay, so I hope some of this was interesting, and I think some of you in the audience might be looking to become top professionals in either cyber threat intelligence or red teaming and become part of delivering the type of projects. So what to do next? So the professional advice that I could give you then is to look out what the common professional development path might look like for these professions, and keeping in mind that the people we really consider the core team for these kind of deliveries are already at the top of their game. So they are always very senior in their field already. And don't try to skip the spokes in the ladder. I know that it can be frustrating for a junior person to be in this field, and you're seeing that the other guys are doing this very cool stuff, but I'm still stuck with the support stuff and basic things. But this is really about building your skills and gaining that professional experience by doing the basic things first. And similarly, of course, for the red teaming, you need to be becoming an expert in pen testing first to become a champion in red team testers. There's really no skipping that spoke in the ladder. I want to highlight this point last, that sometimes I see very young professionals eager to get into this field and eager to get to the red teaming, but I kind of recognize after discussing them that they tend to think that they can somehow skip the point where they become experts in information technology first. So in my opinion, at least, of course this is not a rule, but in my opinion you can't become an expert red teamer being an expert in networking, operating systems, applications, how do all of those stuff work, what makes them vulnerable, how those vulnerabilities can be exploited in pen tests, and then consider becoming an expert in red teaming and how these can be chained together to bypass the controls and defenses in some of the most complex assignments you can get your hands on or participate in as a consultant. That's a talk. Thank you very much for your attention. I think we're open to questions. Yeah?